In the entire thousand-year history of the British monarchy, kings have lost their thrones for many reasons: rebellion, civil war, political overthrow. But in 1936, something happened that had no precedent at all. A reigning monarch stepped down, completely voluntarily. Not because he was defeated, not under threat, but because he chose a woman over a crown. His name was Edward VIII, and his decision would change the future of the British royal family forever. He was born Edward Albert Christian George Andrew Patrick David in 1894, the eldest son of the future King George V. As the heir apparent, his destiny was set in stone. The monarchy back then wasn't just a symbol, it was the stabilizing force for a vast global empire that spanned continents. Royal children weren't raised like everyone else. Their lives were meticulously structured around duty, restraint, and constant preparation for public service. Emotion was always secondary to responsibility. Edward grew up in a strict atmosphere of discipline and high expectations. His entire education revolved around history, politics, and imperial affairs. But as he entered early adulthood, it became obvious that his personality was radically different from the monarchs who came before him. He was modern, socially confident, and completely fascinated by contemporary culture. During his time as the Prince of Wales, he traveled the world, meeting people from all walks of life across the empire. He was charismatic, charming, and widely admired. But he was also restless. Many who observed him felt he just didn't have the temperament traditionally associated with being a king. He preferred informal company, modern lifestyles, and real emotional connections over the stiff formality of the court. That very personal disposition would soon collide head-on with his royal duty. The person who would change everything, Wallis Simpson, entered Edward's life in the early 1930s. She was an American, well-spoken, socially skilled, and moved confidently in elite circles. But she carried a past that made her completely unacceptable in royal terms. She had already been divorced once, and her second marriage was also coming to an end. In our modern world, this might not even raise an eyebrow, but in 1930s Britain, it was explosive. The monarch is also the supreme governor of the Church of England, which at the time did not recognize remarriage after divorce if a former spouse was still living. Beyond just religion, the monarchy was expected to be a symbol of moral continuity and unwavering stability. Despite all this, Edward became deeply, completely attached to Wallis. Their relationship developed quickly, and her influence over him became more and more visible. Courtiers started to worry. The government took notice. But at this point, Edward was still the Prince of Wales, not yet the king. That was all about to change. In January 1936, King George V died. Edward ascended to the throne as King Edward VIII. And just like that, what was once a private relationship became a national matter of state. The new king made it perfectly clear that he intended to marry Wallis Simpson as soon as her divorce was finalized. This declaration sent alarm bells ringing throughout the British government, led by Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin. The problem wasn't a romantic one. It was constitutional. If the king married a twice-divorced woman, the government might be forced to resign in protest. The Dominions, countries like Canada and Australia, could object. The church would absolutely refuse to recognize the marriage. Public opinion was divided and uncertain. Remember, Britain in 1936 was still recovering from the Great Depression and facing growing tensions in Europe, especially from Nazi Germany. Political stability was absolutely vital. A monarchy getting tangled up in a major scandal could seriously weaken national confidence at a time when it was needed most. So, the new king faced a constitutional dilemma with three possible paths. First, he could end the relationship with Wallis. Second, he could ignore all advice and marry her anyway, which would trigger a massive political crisis. Or third, he could abdicate, give up the throne. Negotiations dragged on for weeks behind closed doors. Prime Minister Baldwin made it crystal clear. The government would not, under any circumstances, support the marriage. Edward, however, believed the establishment was exaggerating the danger. He was also convinced that he simply couldn't perform his duties as king without Wallis by his side as his wife. For him, the issue had become deeply personal. For the government, it remained purely constitutional. Something had to give. On December 10, 1936, Edward made his choice. He signed the official instrument of abdication. Parliament approved it the very next day. That evening, in a historic radio address to the nation and the world, the former king explained his decision. His speech was brief and measured. He told everyone that he had found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and discharge his duties as king as he would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman he loved. With that, his reign was over. His younger brother, Albert, became King George VI. Few personal choices in history have had such long-term consequences. The new King George VI, a man who never expected to rule, would go on to guide Britain through the dark days of World War II, becoming a symbol of national resilience. His eldest daughter would later become Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-reigning monarch in British history. A deeply personal choice made in 1936 reshaped the line of succession and the future of the monarchy for generations to come. After giving up the throne, Edward was given the title Duke of Windsor. In 1937, he married Wallis in a private ceremony in France. No senior members of the royal family attended. The couple spent the rest of their lives largely in Europe and later in the United States. Their relationship with the rest of the royal family remained distant and, at times, quite strained. Edward never returned to any central royal role. His life, which was supposed to be one of public duty, became one of social appearances and exile. Even today, historians remain divided on his legacy. Some see Edward as a tragic romantic figure, a man who valued his personal truth and love above the ceremonial obligations of a crown he never truly wanted. Others argue that in an era of rising political danger across Europe, he placed his own personal desires above the stability and unity of his nation. His reign lasted less than a year, just 326 days, yet the abdication crisis remains one of the most dramatic and fascinating events of the 20th century monarchy. Ultimately, the story of Edward VIII is not simply a love story. It's a powerful case study in leadership, responsibility, and the complex limits of personal freedom, especially within institutions built on centuries of tradition. It shows that even kings are bound by forces much larger than themselves: history, law, and public expectation. And it leaves us with one enduring, fascinating question: should a monarch belong to the nation or to himself? Thank you for watching. If you found this story as compelling as we do, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's most pivotal moments. We'll see you next time.